In different parts of the world, people have reported encounters with something that shouldn't exist. In 2012, in Zimbabwe, workers abandoned a dam after inexplicable attacks from the water. In Israel, witnesses claimed to see a humanoid figure emerging from the sea before disappearing. And during World War II, soldiers reported encounters with something watching them from the ocean. What you will see today is not a legend. These are documented cases of something that attacked from the water. And let's start this list with a case that paralyzed an entire government. The year was 2012 in Zimbabwe. A group of workers had been sent to two of the country's dams to install water pumps. A routine task, nothing out of the ordinary. But from the very first day, something didn't feel right. The workers began to report strange things near the water, figures that appeared and disappeared on the surface, sounds that had no explanation, and a feeling that none of them knew how to describe with words, but that everyone felt equally. The feeling that something was watching them from inside. Shortly after, the pumps they had installed began to appear destroyed every morning. No sign of vandalism, no technical explanation, as if something during the night had entered and destroyed them from the inside. That was when the first workers started refusing to return. First one, then another, until no one wanted to go back. And the reason they gave was always the same. They had seen something in the water, something that shouldn't be there. The government decided to act, but not to investigate what the workers claimed to have seen, but to solve the technical problem. Why weren't the Osborne dam pumps working? What was blocking the water system? They sent professional divers, trained men with oxygen masks and diving gear. Their mission was simple: go down, check for blockages, and come up with a solution. They went down. They were down there. And when they surfaced, long pause, they swore they would never go back. None of them wanted to explain what they had seen. They only said they wouldn't return, and they didn't. At that point, the government thought that perhaps it was all a cultural issue, that their workers, being Zimbabwean, were too influenced by local beliefs, that the fear was psychological. So, they made a decision that seemed logical. They hired foreign workers, people from other countries, people who had never heard of the legends of Zimbabwe, people who had no cultural reason to be afraid. They also refused to continue, without giving any explanation. At that moment, the government ran out of arguments. But the most disturbing part of this case is not the workers who fled, nor the divers who refused to speak. The most disturbing part is what had been happening near those waters long before. The local police chief publicly confirmed that at least 2 people had died under inexplicable circumstances at that same dam, and that the community had had to perform rituals to calm whatever lived inside. But even that pales in comparison to what happened to 2 children herding their cattle near the lake. They said something emerged from the water, and that it motioned for them to come closer. And they weren't the only ones. Sometime later, 4 fishermen approached the lake at night. Suddenly, something emerged from the water and asked them who had given them permission to be there. The 4 men jumped into their car and didn't stop until they reached the town. It was in this context that Zimbabwe's Minister of Water Resources, Samuel Sipepa Nkomo, had to stand before his country's Senate and admit something he never thought he would say in his life: that his workers had been driven out of the water, by mermaids. The minister was a Christian, an educated man, a government official, but before the Senate, he had no choice but to say it out loud. And what is even more revealing, no one in that room dared to laugh. The healers arrived, ceremonies were performed, livestock was sacrificed, traditional beer was prepared as an offering to whatever lived in those waters. And then something happened that no one knew how to explain. The pumps that had been destroyed for weeks started up. The water began to flow. The workers returned. Was it a coincidence? The power of collective belief? Or was there really something in those waters that, finally, was appeased? No one, to this day, has an answer. On the banks of the Mzintlava River, near the town of Mount Aleph in South Africa, something was killing people. It wasn't a known animal, it wasn't a disease, it wasn't an accident. It was something the villagers had feared for generations, and that, until that moment, the outside world had refused to take seriously. It all started in January of 1997. People living near the river began to disappear, without a trace, without explanation. And when their bodies finally appeared, they did so in circumstances that no one knew how to interpret. Men, women, and among them, a school-age girl whose funeral had taken place barely a month before the case hit the newspapers. But what truly disturbed the community was not the death toll. It was the condition in which the bodies appeared. Their faces had been devoured. The skin, the soft tissues of the face and neck, gone, as if something had torn them off in a way that no known explanation could justify. The police had an explanation. Captain Mzuko of the Mount Aleph Police examined the bodies and declared that they had all been in the water for a prolonged period, that river crabs had consumed the soft parts of their faces and throats, that in one case, the crabs were still attached to the body when they pulled it from the water. They are drownings, he said, simple drownings, and with that, the case seemed closed. But then someone spoke who was not a villager, who was not a healer, who had no reason to believe in water creatures. And what he said in public changed everything. On April 29, 1997, at an Eastern Cape legislative meeting, the Minister of Agriculture, Ezra Siguela, stood before the government and officially declared that a monster, half fish, half horse, had devoured at least 7 people in the Mzintlava River region, and that the government would organize an armed mission to hunt it down. This wasn't a superstitious villager talking around a campfire. It was a minister in front of a legislative assembly, reported by national and international media. The villagers had been saying the same thing for months. That what lived in that river had a name, that they had known it for generations, that they were not superstitious, that they were educated people who had seen something the police refused to acknowledge. They called it the Mamlambo, a massive creature, half fish, half horse, that according to those who lived on the banks of that river, dragged its victims into the water and drowned them. And that, at night, it glowed with a green light from the depths. The official investigation found no concrete evidence, but neither did it find an explanation that convinced those who lived on the banks of that river. To this day, the communities of the Mzintlava continue to warn visitors. When you see a green light glowing from the water at night, do not get close. (1943), World War II was at its most brutal point. In the Pacific, armies fought for every island, every coastline, every meter of territory, and in the midst of that chaos, a group of Japanese soldiers stationed on a small remote island within the Kei Islands chain in Indonesia began to report something that had nothing to do with the war, something that disturbed them far more than any combat, something that was watching them from the water. The soldiers were part of a surveillance team. Their mission was to monitor the coastal zone of the Kei Islands, a strategically important area for Japanese control of the South Pacific. But from their first days on the island, several of them began to report the same thing, a figure in the water, small, humanoid, that appeared near the coastal lagoons and shores, and watched them. It didn't flee immediately, it didn't attack, it just looked at them. And that, for some reason, was the most disturbing part of all. When the soldiers asked the island natives what that creature was, the answer left them speechless. The locals knew it perfectly well. They called it Orurang Eon, in Malay, fishman, and according to the natives, it was common in that area, so common that it didn't even surprise them. What did surprise the soldiers was the description they were given. The creature was approximately 1.5 meters tall. It had salmon pink skin, a partially human face, long arms and legs, webbed hands and feet, and along its head, neck, and shoulders, spikes. Then came the day that none of those soldiers would forget. A group was exploring the island when they reached a coastal lagoon. Everything seemed quiet, until the water began to churn. Suddenly, one of the creatures leapt out of the water and landed on a nearby rock. It turned toward the soldiers, looked directly at them, and let out a sound. A bubbling gurgle that none of them knew how to describe, but that they all interpreted in the exact same way. It was not friendly. Then they saw a second creature, moving through the water toward them, fast, too fast to be human. The soldiers opened fire. The creatures disappeared beneath the water and did not resurface. Sergeant Taro Horaiba, in command of the team, asked the natives to notify him immediately if they captured any of the creatures, dead or alive. And shortly after, the natives called him. They had found one on the beach, dead. Sergeant Horiba approached the body in the village chief's house and examined it. It was approximately 1.6 meters long, reddish hair that reached its shoulders, spikes along its neck, and a mouth. That was not human. It was the mouth of a carp. After the war, Sergeant Horiba tried to bring the case to the scientific community. He wanted someone to investigate what he and his men had seen. No one listened to him. The war was over. The world had other priorities, and the testimony of some soldiers on a remote Pacific island was filed away into oblivion. But the natives of the Kei Islands still speak of the Orurang Eon to this day, as if it had never ceased to exist. To understand this case, you have to understand something first. In Japan, mermaids are not beautiful creatures that sing on the rocks. They are not the seductive figures we know in the West. In Japan, they are something else. They call them Ningyo, and those who have seen them wish they hadn't. The first records of the Ningyo in Japan date back to the year 619 AD. They are documented in the Nihon Shoki, one of the country's oldest historical texts. Since then, sightings accumulated over the centuries, and they all describe the same thing. A creature with the body of a fish, golden scales, a partially human face but with monkey-like features, long fingers ending in sharp claws, and a size that could vary from that of a child to that of a massive marine animal. It was not beautiful, it was terrifying. But what terrified the Japanese the most wasn't its appearance. It was what happened after seeing it. According to historical records, the Ningyo could cast curses on anyone who tried to capture it or harm it. And these weren't minor curses. Entire towns were destroyed by earthquakes and tsunamis, after a fisherman made the mistake of catching one in his nets. Japanese fishermen had a clear rule. If a Ningyo fell into your net, you threw it back into the water immediately. But there was one case where that wasn't possible. During the Edo period, in what is today Toyama Prefecture, on the coast of the Sea of Japan, something emerged from the waters. It wasn't small, it wasn't harmless. Historical records describe it as a Ningyo over 11 meters long, with horns. And it was heading toward the coast. What happened next was recorded in the historical archives of the period. The inhabitants of the area did not flee. They armed themselves, 450 weapons. That is what they needed to face the creature. 450 people willing to confront something none of them had ever seen before, something that emerged from the very sea they depended on to live. Confrontation took place, and the creature was repelled, but no one in that village ever looked at the sea the same way again. What makes this case different from all the previous ones is this. It doesn't come from an oral legend passed down from generation to generation. It comes from written records of the Edo period, a period known for its meticulous historical documentation. Centuries of records, centuries of testimonies, all pointing toward the exact same thing. Today, in temples and shrines all across Japan, mummies of what the priests call Ningyo are preserved. Some have been in those temples for centuries. Some are considered sacred relics. And the priests who guard them say the same thing when someone asks if they are real, that they wish they weren't. Four cases, 4 different places, 4 different eras, and a single question that no one has been able to answer. What is really in the depths of the water? Perhaps something we prefer not to understand. However, there are things that were actually captured underwater that have no explanation and that you can see in this video.